welcome to this week's episode of the Uncovery Podcast. My name is Maddie and I have anorexia and I'm recovering from it, and I talk about it on this podcast. And right now I should probably be finishing packing, but instead I am recording this podcast and I get to go on a trip. I get to go on a work trip. I get to go on a overseas international work trip, and I'm very excited about it, which is something that I couldn't say a year ago. The prospect of that a year ago was absolutely terrifying to me. I felt so stressed at even the thought of sort of being outside of my little kind of recovery bubble that I just had to create in order to get through that period of time. So now, a year later, it's just every single reason that I've had for recovery now feels like it is in my hands, and that as long as I just stay with it, everything that I've ever wanted can be mine. That is genuinely how I feel. And that comes with a lot of fear at the same time, because I hate the idea of getting comfortable with a good thing, getting comfortable with being happy, and then having things fall apart. So trying to step away from that sort of mindset of, oh, everything is potentially going to fall apart, because I just have to keep believing the same way that I do about recovery, that success and happiness and every dream being realized is just an inevitability. It's just going to happen. It's just a matter of when and it, exactly how it looks. So I had this idea to talk about this on a podcast eventually anyways, and it seemed really timely to talk about it now that I'm finally getting to do a bit of larger travel, because my experience with traveling and my eating disorder, I actually don't know if this is unique or if this is typical of people with eating disorders. So I found this blog post that I wrote, and I had come back from my sort of 3-4 month travel stint in 2017. And if you've listened to the podcast and you know a bit of my story, when I left for that trip to do my yoga teacher training and travel Southeast Asia and go to Australia, when I was leaving, I was sort of at the peak of as good as my recovery got that first round of recovery. But I was very much, in retrospect, like half-baked. I was not ready, I don't think, for the, the extreme changes and the amount of reliance and stability you have to have with your recovery before doing something that big, which sounds maybe silly to people that don't have eating disorders, because like, oh, well, you're traveling, you're not going to the moon, like you're going to Bali, relax. But any kind of shakeup when you're in the middle of recovery, and if you're not really, really solid in it, can be a huge setback. And I found that very, very quickly that time. It took almost no time for me to sort of restricting again, was moving a lot. You're backpacking, it's hot. It is so easy to slip. And I had lost a bunch of weight and I wasn't mad about it. And that's how I knew that I was kind of on the brink of a relapse, I guess, or at least a setback at that time. So I'm going to read this blog post just verbatim from where I was at when I returned home, because I wanted people not to worry at the time, because I still, on some level felt like, okay, well, I'm home now and I can kind of get this back together. Unfortunately, then I was leaving for London, and everything that involved sent me kind of flying even further backwards. So at this time, I felt like I was being self-aware enough to just tell people that I was, my head was still at least somewhat in the game and that these things happen. But I'm just going to read it because I think it's an interesting take on the way that travel and anorexia intersect, at least for me in my experience. And then I think next week I'll just do an episode of how the trip actually went and what you should be doing in regards to recovery when you are traveling. So this will kind of be like a reflective, how it actually impacts travel. And then we'll talk about some solutions next week. Okay. So this is Maddie of August 17th, 2017. All right, here we go. This is something I wasn't sure I wanted to share, and that's why I've hesitated to post about it until now. But I think it's absolutely something I need to share. Honesty has blown my life open in the best way, especially as it pertains to recovery. It's also a conversation had with people I've spent a lot of time with since coming home. In part, a preemptive move to soften any alarm bells, and in part as an ongoing open conversation about where I am. Because there's nothing more scary or nauseating or panic-inducing, but also freeing, than being open with your ugliest stuff. I also could have titled this, No One Panic, okay? Anorexia loves traveling. This was something I actually knew before I left in April. 5 years ago, on a month-long Europe trip, the first travel abroad I'd done, I'd lost a bunch of weight, a noticeable, significant amount in the course of about a month. I was actively under-eating, we were moving constantly, and I was in the place of my disorder that I was all in. It would take more than 3 years after this trip before loved ones concerned would convince me to pursue recovery at all. But during that trip, it was anorexia's dream come true. Unsupervised, almost effortless weight loss. And effortless has an asterisk, which says, effortless is not really the right word. But after sitting on this for days, I don't know how else to fully explain it. No one with or without an eating disorder should find it effortless to fuel on as little as I was. But being accustomed to it at that time, I remember feeling like it was easy. It feels absolutely shameful to even type that out, but I know pre-Bali, a year and a half into solid, consistent upward motion recovery, that whether anyone explicitly said it or not, those who had been there then would fear that the same thing would happen this time. I want to be really clear that at no point before I left did I plan to use travel as a means to re-engage in restriction or my previous relationship with food. I was, on the contrary, hyper aware of the risks of being on my own and with the blueprint of travel's past. While in Bali, I took full advantage of the love surrounding me, dug as deep as I could, and leaned into the support I had there when I needed it. But the reality is I didn't have my eye on it when I branched out solo. I tried to live in every moment and was so busy putting one flip-flopped foot in front of the other from one side of the world to the next, I barely thought about recovery. It was a blessing and a curse because a peace of mind also meant that I didn't consider eating off schedule in unfamiliar places without compensating for the amount of movement and heat. And by the time it was clear enough to me the degree of what was happening, I was close to coming home. It took everything I had to message my parents. It was excruciating to admit that I had slipped and terrifying to think that I would hurt or worry the people that I love back home. And the plot twist, which I should know by now is not a plot twist whatsoever, is that while any weight loss is concerning to those who are supporting an anorexia recoverer in training, no one was angry or disappointed. They were there, just like before, holding space and believing that I was still as capable and worthy as ever. This time, though, I have skills, support, and transparency to lean into. The irony of jumping out of planes, climbing cliffs, driving solo through Australia, and not being able to eat a sandwich is not lost on me. I know the work that needs to be done. Anorexia sometimes appears to have me on the ropes, but I'm not throwing in the towel. I'm not finished. And even when I feel like I'm failing at it, recovery is still a piece of my life, a piece that I'm bringing back into the foreground. If I'm not hiding, my eating disorder can't hide either. And shadowy secrecy is where anorexia lives and grows. So I'm sharing this because maybe you need to hear this and maybe I need to hear it myself. It's okay. Recovery of any kind is not linear. I've heard this, you probably have too, but it's said so much that the impact gets lost. Recovery is not linear. And this isn't an eating disorder thing or even a mental health thing. This is a life thing. Setbacks, step backs, and steps off the tracks. The difference between going completely off the rails and getting back in the ring is recognition, the ability to reach out and be vulnerable. Synopsis. I'm not always okay, but I will be, I promise. No one panic, okay? Okay, so that was like the blog entry, journal entry coming off of that trip where I started to kind of slip back in 2017. And I want to just briefly explain why it is that I think anorexia loves traveling. You're unsupervised, so you're not really accountable to the people that are back home that would be seeing you every day. You can get away with moving around a lot So whether you're doing conscious exercise, and like on some trips that I was on, I was like finding every yoga class I could, going for runs every morning of like a 4-month trip in it, no matter where I was, no matter how dodgy it was. I was like running past dogs that were like chasing me in Bali, because there are some mean dogs there. And like I would do it anyway. So nobody's monitoring that. You're moving around a lot and you are choosing what you're eating. And there's a lot of excuses to be like, oh, I'll just grab something quick, or I'll just have a snack, or I'll just miss this meal, because nobody's watching. And your eating disorder will love that. Your eating disorder does not want you to sit down 3 times a day and have snacks in between and indulge in all of the foods in new places. Your eating disorder does not want that. And if nobody is with you that knows what is going on with you, it's completely tempting to give in to those impulses. Some people go traveling and they eat really freely. And lots of people go on vacation and maybe their weight fluctuates a little bit because they're indulging in things that they don't usually. And some people ensure that they have a gym readily available to them so that they can earn, quote unquote, all of that holiday food or whatever it is. But I think what it comes down to is when you're in unfamiliar territory, your eating disorder is the safest feeling thing that you have. And so when you're traveling and doing new things and you're on your own, that can always be something that feels like home, is your eating disorder. So what I'm excited for this week is to get to change that narrative for the first time in my adult life. I get to go eat, I don't know, pasta? Pizza? What? Who's she? Yeah, we'll see how it goes. And I will update you all next week when I'm back. And we'll talk a little bit more about eating disorders and traveling. But wish me luck. I'll send photos to the Instagram. Leave a rating and review if you're there. And we'll see you next time.